We have one more panel before our next break. Crew resource management has played a key role in improving aviation safety over the last few decades. How can we build upon what we've already done in this area to further improve safety? Captain Dave McKenney is ALPA's Director of Pilot Training and will be moderating this panel. Dave, we look forward to hearing from you and your distinguished members of the panel. It's all to you.
Thank you for that great introduction, Captain Gingalis. And so where we are is Legia's group taught us about resiliency and how the resilience in the operation. Helena's group gave us human-centered operating procedures. And this last panel is now giving us a bunch of information and trying to figure out how to manage it. So our panel here today is going to talk about what do we do with all that in the operation and how do we manage that amongst the crew. So let me introduce my esteemed panel. To my left is Dr. Barbara Holder. She's a technology fellow with the Advanced Technology Division of Honeywell. Captain Rob Piroumian is a training coordinator in Human Factors Working Group at Delta Airlines. Did I get your name right? Is it? Yes, good. And then Captain Chuck Hogeman, Director of Flight Training Support for United. So before we get started with the panelists, I'd just like to kind of set the stage and talk about a few topics that are near and dear to all of our hearts, and to show how CRM needs to evolve. We've all heard about how technology is evolving, the complexity, and CRM actually needs to evolve on how we're teaching it because we have to keep up with the technology. A fully qualified pilot requires a high degree of expertise in both motor skills and cognition in order to safely operate the aircraft in our airspace system. The aviation industry often labels this knowledge and skills as technical skills. Some examples are just performing the maneuvers, flight path management that we've heard about, and even recalling and applying some of the rules. But in addition to these technical skills, we have the human side of it, which requires human capabilities to manage the variability, the complexity, and handling of the unknown or unexpected situations associated with this flying that we do in this real world. These human capabilities are often called airmanship, judgment, non-technical skills, soft skills, to name a few. We've had them since we started flying airplanes. But in the last 20, 30 years, we put them under the CRM umbrella as something to teach. These things include such things as leadership, planning, managing tasks, and communications. So crew management has evolved. When it first kind of started, we talked about ground training to educate pilots on the CRM concept and conflict resolution. In some cases today, the standalone modules that we did 20, 30 years ago, when the basic concepts have kind of disappeared. The assumption is, I think, is that the pilots already know that. My question is, do they? Is their current CRM training effective? And does it result in the expected performance that we want out of our crews? Does it take into account the human capabilities and measure human performance? How do we actually train the skills often associated with CRM? So as I said, it's grown more than communications between the captain and first officer and other crew members. We've added additional capabilities now to the CRM thing that we call things that we have to teach, the human capabilities, such as, you know, as mentioned some earlier, but leading, managing tasks, monitoring, making decisions, how to work with each other, and we've expanded that pilot first officer to include other members of the team, the flight attendants, dispatchers, and ops. So CRM has really evolved today to define a set of skills that supports pilot technical and decision-making flying capabilities. It does this by providing pilots with the cognitive capabilities and interpersonal skills needed to address human error by managing resources within a defined operational framework, which often, most of you use something, threat and error management or risk management. So is it really appropriate to call it crew resource management or cockpit resource management? If we don't call it that, what should we call it in the future? What should we be calling it now? It is widely recognized that these errors related to the CRM principles have contributed to accidents and incidents. Therefore, pilots need to be fully competent in performing these skills to avoid errors. Human factors research has provided us good information on what humans can and cannot do. And we need to make sure as a group, as you heard already today, to integrate these properly into our policies, procedures, and our training to achieve the performance that we want during the line operations. One way that we're attempting to do this now is to integrate the technical and non-technical skills together as we train, instead of as two separate entities. So concerns with merging these technical and non-technical skills is having objectable and measurable performance standards. Is a performance standard that says something like one member of the crew will at all times be monitoring the flight path? Is that objective and measurable? What if both pilots turn their heads to look at their EFBs at the same time? Is one pilot monitoring the flight path, or are they both looking at their windows? How long is too long to look? How about a performance standard that states pilots demonstrate the ability to identify, assess, and mitigate risk encompassing inappropriate activities and distractions during taxis? These are actually performance standards that we have right now at certain carriers. Is this something that we can objectively measure? So I believe there's a lot of subjectivity right now in how we're measuring this performance, and we need to find a way to do it better. So we need observable behaviors and performance standards that are understandable, trainable, and measurable. The standards for evaluating non-technical skills are different than the standards for technical skills. So AQP requires this evaluation of CRM. However, due to the lack of defined, and I say often because some carriers have done it, but due to the lack of defined, measurable, and objectable performance standards, is it appropriate to be grading these soft skills before we define them? These and other aspects of the CRM will be discussed in the panel today. So let's just go ahead and get started, and I'll start off with Dr. Holder. And Barbara, what are your thoughts on how do we develop this human-centered technical skills and knowledge required to safely operate an airplane in the airspace system? And how do they relate to the technical skills?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having this meeting and enabling us to talk about the human in the system. It's very important. So in order to go beyond CRM, we need to go beneath CRM and clearly define what the knowledge and skills are that we believe contribute to proficient performance. We talk about these skills in terms of technical and non-technical, and we have labels like CRM, TEM, RRM that describe aspects of the non-technical in different ways. The technical skills are pretty simple and can be objectively trained and evaluated, but the non-technical skills are more challenging, and part of the reason for that is we haven't really clearly defined them. Depending on who you ask, CRM, TEM could be interchangeable, they could be completely separate, they could focus on different non-technical categories of performance. And so one of the things that we need to do is define those non-technical skills and break them down into what it is we actually specifically want the pilot to do. And so I can give an example of situational awareness. And every time I go into a meeting, there's a mini debate about whether or not it's situational awareness or situation awareness. And you know, even that term itself is not widely consistent and definable consistently across our industry. And so one of the things about that that's challenging is that situational awareness isn't actually something pilots do. It's the result of what they do. So it's actually a measurement of how well the pilot's mental model that they've constructed matches the operational situation that they're currently in. And that construction of a mental model is what we need to be teaching. And we can break that down into its basic components. So just generically, it's the input gathering, so understanding what the information is. We're perceptual beings. We can't pay attention to everything at once. So we have to choose what we perceive, and we do that by managing and allocating our attention. And all of that relies, being able to do that, you know, what you deciding what to pay attention to, relies on your technical knowledge. Because you need to know what's important when, you need to know what the airspeed flag means, you need to know what the messages mean, because you know, it's not full English, typically. And be able to interpret that into meaning relies on a lot of systems knowledge, as well as your operational expertise that you've obtained over seeing these cues over a long period of time across different sets of operational circumstances. And then being able to integrate that into a clear understanding of what the situation is that you're currently in. And so all of that is built upon a strong foundation of technical proficiency. And so you can't really have one without the other. You need both, and they're both equally important. But in terms of advancing CRM, we really need to break down every single non-technical category that we're talking about and describe the actual performance we want the pilots to do.
So thank you, Barbara, for that interesting information on defining them and the situation awareness that we all have. So yeah, because so let's move now to Captain Piroumian. And can you provide us some information on what Delta's been doing in the area of defining and quantifying the CRM elements and how they've incorporated that into their pilot training?
Yeah. Sure can. Well, first of all, CRM after lunch, who's with me? Seems every time we speak CRM, it's always after lunch. I think it's a conspiracy, but I'm not sure. Second admin item. So this is my first time at this type of venue, so I appreciate it. And thanks to the association for inviting me here. Next admin item, because I was sort of a last-minute pinch hitter, I finished my notes during lunch. And if you notice somewhere in the literature, it has me listed as an attaining coordinator, because I was filling out the form on my iPhone with about a 2-hour deadline to get that done. So I'm not sure what I am actually the training coordinator. I'm not sure what an attaining coordinator is, but I'm striving to become one. So there you go. That out of the way. So just a little quick brief history. Back in 2015, Delta had a minor incident. Someone was saying earlier how we're a very safe industry and we don't need to look as far forward or as deep because we've done so well. But our senior leadership was bright enough to have the foresight to think, well, you know, maybe we should treat that as if it happened so that we can prevent the next accident without having the first one, right? So they formed a group. Some of the smart guys here in the room were a part of that, the directors and the chair of this Flight Path Management Steering Committee. And of that group, they came out with the whole pile of recommendations. They went out and found the smartest people they could find. I wasn't on the phone call list, not saying. But so they went out and found all the smartest guys around Delta. They put this group together. They came up with a pile of recommendations, created new policies, procedures. And in there, somewhere along the way, there was also some recommendations to infuse more CRM training or infuse CRM into our training. Kind of a tall order, actually, because it's something we've been doing. As I looked at the calendar, I realized that today I began my 28th year at Delta Airlines, and something we've been doing since the day I got hired was talking about CRM. So we've been doing this all the way, and we've been doing a good job of it. So to make it better was going to be a little bit more interesting. But to your point now, which is we wanted to find out how do we take these soft skills and make them, I use the word quantifiable, probably not a good word, maybe tangible is a better word. So in these rewrites of policies and procedures, we rewrote our flight crew training manual, human factors section. And in there, we revamped the whole thing. We boiled our CRM skills down to 5. We removed some. Situational awareness was removed, in fact, as a skill. Monitoring, because it is a new focus, was added as a CRM skill. And to be able to teach it to both our instructors and then obviously downstream to our line pilots, we attempted to, again, I use the word quantify. We try to quantify CRM because everybody in this room gets it. But if you go down the hall or out in the world and you rank and file line pilot and say, well, just give me a definition of CRM, would you? It's kind of this. So we're saying, how do I take air and teach it? How can I tell you what to do in the cockpit, right? So that's what we did. We took the 5 CRM skills, and in it we put some observable behaviors. The observable behaviors are now what we became our qual standards. So essentially, it becomes enforceable, it becomes something you can evaluate. So after that was done, we said, well, now we need to take that. We've made it what we wanted. Now we can tell our pilots what it is we expect them to do. We can evaluate on that. And the really takeaway was now we actually produce a standard message so that everybody will teach the same page. We can evaluate it the same. We took that and we decided we would start to infuse that in our training. So my team as training coordinator, we write a flight path management spot training for every CQ cycle. It's 10, 15 minutes or so. And what we did in that was we identified some of the observables from our CRM skills, and really gave it something for our instructors to look for. So in the hard skills, kind of every instructor, they know when to turn their head, they know what they're looking for, and our line pilots are the same. They say, well, I can fly plus or minus 10 degrees, but our line pilots don't want to fly plus or minus 10. They want to fly plus or minus 1, right? They want to know where the boundaries are, what to do in the airplane, and how to make that work out. So now we give them hard skills and say, now, if you want to do workload management, this is what you should do. Previously, I would say you could walk up to a pilot and say, well, show me workload management. And being the good, dutiful pilot, they'll say, well, just tell me what it is you want me to do, and I will do workload management. So we gave that to them. We gave that to them as skills. We gave that to them as good advice. I'm a late starter in life. My kids are 9 and 11. So I tell my kids how to be good kids. I want them to be good kids. So you brush your teeth, and you won't get a cavity. You go to bed early, you won't be tired. Study hard, you get good grades. Now I say to the line pilots, here's our gift to you, Chapter 9. These are observable behaviors. So Leisha asked me, I think, once and said, how do you change human behavior? And I was stumped for about 6 months. Woke up one day and said, how do you change human behavior? I do it every day with my kids. I tell them how to behave. There you go. So we give you a list. It was so simple, it took me 6 months to figure it out. So we give you a list of observable behaviors. I consider it a list of advice, like I say with my kids. Well, you don't want to be the next pilot to file a deviation. Follow my steps. Follow our advice. We went on past that. In our spots, to be very specific, we took a very few of the observables, and we wrote it into our instructor guide so that the instructor also knew. So they know when to turn their head. They know exactly what it is they're looking for. They can take notes. They can debrief. All these events are training events, not gradable. So they're great. We can actually have good debriefs with that. We took it a step further. We just finished about a year-long project rewriting the initial qual. I can tell you more detail at another time or afterward, but I'll give you the highlights. In our line-oriented simulation part of the training, we took out all the non-normals. There was a gasp across the 4th floor. You took out the non-normals. How are we going to train this? Well, what we did was we didn't take them all out, but we introduced piles of real-world threats, unexpected threats. We reduced the non-normals to about what is probably a fair ratio of what goes on out in the real world. ASAP data, mountains of ASAP data now, kind of indicates that non-normals are not what's causing the problem out there. If it's a day VFR on a runway change, we need to train our pilots to do that. Our line-oriented simulation modules are exactly that. We either took what was an obvious threat, or we built in threats and distractions all the way through these days. We fly them in real time. If it was up to me, I would take the freeze button out of the simulator and chuck it out, but we'd just tape over it, pretend they're not allowed to use it. So we force our pilots to fly in real time, managing real-world threats, and they're not, again, not gradable through those modules, so that's what we're teaching them how to do. So ultimately, and again, I'll spare you the long story, but ultimately they finish with us, they go out on the line. Our line check pilots are now being trained to carry them to the end of the road, which is, in our world, we train them on all these skills, we tell them what's coming, we show them what the threat is, we tell them what skill is appropriate, we show them which observable behaviors fits best, and then we take them in the simulator and fly them through these profiles. So we train them concept. We teach them how to manage and use CRM skills in a canned environment where they know what's coming, so that when they go out on their OE, they go out with line check pilots who will carry on the message, show them how to employ the skills that we've taught them in a world where they don't know what's coming.
Excellent. I think, so when you give the observable behaviors, I think you also probably give what's not acceptable. You give them the acceptable behaviors, right? Do you also give them the unaccepted, or what constitutes good behavior, what constitutes, for choice of, or bad words, but bad behavior?
Yeah. Not particularly. We just say these are good habits, you should do them, and I guess maybe we gave them too much credit to say, well, if you don't do these, that's not good, but.
I mean, what's unacceptable, what's acceptable, that always helps. And have you seen, from what this new change now, have you seen a change in the performance of your pilots during, in the simulator and line operations?
But, so I'll tell you two very quick stories for results. So just by complete coincidence, I gave the rating ride to the very first crew to finish this new curriculum, and I saw things that I have never seen before. Every time the PM looked away, he said, I'm going heads down. They took off, they were flying back to an airport, the captain's running a checklist, co-pilot's flying the airplane. Typically, the FO would have gone into the box and start putting in arrivals and runways. He flew all the way back to the airport with nothing in the FMS because he was not going to be distracted from flying the airplane, period. Never seen that before. It was great. Usually they're trying to work it. Instead, he finally says to the captain at one point, he says, you know, we got a bunch of gas on the airplane, so when you're done with all that, we got a bunch of box work to do, but we'll get to that later. It was terrific. I'll tell you, my last little story was actually, because it's so timely, I got a phone call yesterday morning from a new first-time captain, and he called me and he had one of the horrible days out in Denver where it was runway changes and wind shears and then more runway changes and the numbers didn't work and on. And he called me and he said, I want to thank you for what you did for us in training. He said, I thought about you all morning while I was moving runways and running up against the DOT time limits and all that. So I've heard anecdotally from other friends, or I should say factually from other friends, that say, yeah, I see a change in the behavior of our new pilots coming out, transition pilots that are flying through this curriculum. So far, I would say it's been pretty successful.
So I know Delta's put a lot of effort into this, and they're continuing to put a lot of effort into it. And I think it's a good example of what Dr. Holder was talking about, how you're actually making the CRM come alive now, because in a lot of ways we've been discussing or training CRM, I call it implicitly, and you have now taken that and made it explicit, so we can actually have something we can get our hands around and actually train it, so the pilots can take it forward.
Yeah,
and then,
I really told you sort of the last part of it, but like I said, for another day, I can tell you how we take them from in-dock to the end.
excellent. Okay, so thank you very much for that. So Captain Chuck Hogeman, it's really a pleasure to have you back here at ALPA, and for those of you who don't know, Captain Hogeman was our director, before his position as director at United Airlines at the training center. He was ALPA's Air Safety Organization Aviation Safety Chair for 6 years, and had various jobs across our structure here for over almost 2 decades. So welcome back, Chuck, and it's happy to have you up here. So Chuck, in your current position, can you give us a perspective of United's CRM Threat and Error Management Program over the past several decades?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. And it is good to be back on an ALPA stage, albeit in a different role. I applaud the association for examining this topic, because I think it's, as these panels have demonstrated, very compelling issues with the whole subject. I was really interested to hear Rob's perspective on what they are doing at Delta. And United's Senior Manager of Human Factors, Rob Strickland, is in the audience. And we have similar discussions like that of how to integrate CRM into our training programs, and that's an ongoing evolution. I'd like to spend the time, my time here, just kind of, and I don't want to say reflecting, because we need to be forward thinking, but you know, I think that we need to examine, you know, this concept of philosophy. Dr. Barshi, I thought, illustrated that very, very well. And I think also Terry Van Hoos this morning made a very, very interesting comment. He says, we have to be proficient at what is expected. And I think those of us that have done training or been involved with training, you know, that may seem self-evident, but I think that's worth asking ourselves. Is our training up to the task of training what's expected? Now, what we've learned in over 40 years is that we are continually exposed to the unexpected. And we thought up until 1978 that, you know, as long as we technically trained our pilots to fly the best airplane they could, that's all it took to fly a safe operation. And you know, there were a number of accidents. Sam mentioned Eastern 401. You know, that was, I was actually young back then. I actually remember that accident. But I was just getting into the airline industry when United 173 occurred in Portland. And you think, well, you know, most of the younger generation pilots say that's ancient history. Well, at United, we actually still introduce our new hire pilots to that. And we're going to be hiring this summer. And matter of fact, we're starting a new hire class of 40 new United pilots this coming week. And they will be exposed to United 173. And they'll also hear about United 232. And it's not so much as we're going to do a deep forensic dive into that. It's we want all United pilots to own United 173. We want them to own United 232 and set a philosophical view of what it is we are trying to do. And I think, and Rob actually mentioned this point in his comments, we've got to get the line pilot in here really understanding and being supportive and endorsing CRM 10 as we call it now. And I think Dave actually suggested maybe that's not what we should be calling it in the future. And I would agree that maybe that's worth a discussion. You know, when United, as did Delta and many airlines in the late 70s, implemented CRM, it was a cultural change. Now, it was good, and a lot of people liked it. But after a while, it kind of wears thin when you are constantly talking about the culture. And, you know, the FAA and our whole evaluation strategy says we really need to look to see how crews are performing in CRM skills. We can't just leave it as a cultural device. And, you know, again, Rob spoke to that. So what I'd like to do is just kind of share some of United's philosophy on CRM 10, and it's the model that we use today. And I'll also illustrate an example of how we have used that model in a very important training topic that we're all going to be faced with here in the next couple of years. So, and you know, for all of you that fly for other airlines other than United, you all have models, and I'm sure they're very, very good models. So this is United's model. When pilots come to work every day, they want to fly a perfect flight. They want everything to go just right. We call it safe operations. Everything goes as we expect. Now, the opposite end of that is something that no one ever wants to face, and that's an incident or an accident. So at United, our CRM 10 model basically looks at the real estate between totally safe operations, the green band, and down here where we never want to go. And we do that by introducing the concept of threats. And a lot's been spoken about threats as part of the TEM discussion that we've heard on the previous panels. So our CRM training focuses, number one, on identifying threats and then preparing for them. And that can be done in a variety of ways. There can be communication skills. There can be workload skills. Below threats, we have error management. And fortunately, the industry took, I think, a brave direction in 2000 by introducing error management as part of our CRM programs. And the idea that, spoiler alert, humans make mistakes. And our approach is look out for threats, develop systems and procedures that help you identify and repair error. And we've done that at United, as I'm sure many of the airlines have, through checklist procedures, standard operating procedures, and the like. And then we get down to, just before we get to that really bad area, the undesired aircraft state. Now, we think of the undesired aircraft state as being in flight, but I will argue in the days that we see now of congested airports and runways, an undesired aircraft state can be on a taxiway you're not supposed to be on, or even worse, a runway you're not supposed to be on. So, you know, our strategy looks at, okay, we've got to recover. We've got to identify that we are in an undesired aircraft state, and how do we repair it? What do we do to repair it? So, United has embraced the concept, and not formally, you won't see it printed, but I think it comes, you know, I think it circles back to what the NTSB suggested in an accident back in 2014, and of course that was UPS 1354 going into Birmingham. And the NTSB suggested that the pilots in that may not have had the same shared mental model. So United puts at the lead paragraph in our flight operations manual is the concept of verbalize, verify, and monitor as an overarching concept that we apply to all of our operations. And suggesting that when you put your head down to pull up weights, you're getting close to the end of the runway, pulling up performance data, verbalizing that your head's down. Now, we'll talk about the EFB phenomena here in just a bit. But that is an overriding concept in getting the shared mental model. We've taken that also to interactions between pilots and the cabin crew and flight attendants. And we have a memory item called what we call the cuss words, which is concern, uncomfortable, and safe. Anytime those words appear in a sentence between a pilot to a flight attendant or a flight attendant to a pilot, that's an attempt to get both of them into a shared mental model. You know, like most airlines, we have 5 fleets. So looking at the types of pilots and the demographics of pilots coming on, I think it's going to be crucial, it's going to be certainly crucial at United, that we work hard to harmonize our CRM approach contextually into the fleets that these pilots are flying. You know, you talk about shared mental models. You have pilots that come from a military background. They've developed a mental model as military pilots. You have civilian pilots that are now moving to network carriers. They have a mental model. And then we need to start talking about the new generation of pilots that are going to be coming in that have a totally different mental model about what the airline industry is all about. And I think with those challenges, I think we are going to have to strive, and I think we've identified that as United as something that we are really going to have to strive to do. Talked about SOP compliance. You know, SOP compliance. When we talk about CRM-10 and we focus on philosophy and maybe even policies, and to a lesser degree procedures, I don't think we should lose track of the fact that, hey, we do expect pilots to work on SOP compliance, to know their airplane. And again, I go back to Terry's point this morning. You need to make sure you've galvanized your ability and your skills in flying your airplane. Because what I think CRM-10 is going to do and allow us to do is train for the unexpected, the unscripted, geez, I didn't see that coming. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a recent training activity, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. The FAA has mandated upset recovery training. And, you know, I know if we had been faced with upset recovery training, prevention and recovery training 10, 15 years ago, we would have looked at that as a technical challenge. But I would argue now, upset prevention and recovery training is the perfect confluence of CRM-10 skills along with technical training. I don't think I have to tell an ALPA audience or anybody else that's remotely familiar with safety on the events that have brought about changes in how we train pilots to deal with the unexpected. 26% of the fatal accidents between 2007 and 2016 are as a result of upsets and in-flight loss of control. So United, United, like a lot of airlines, we're developing our programs. We just rolled out our upset recovery training program for the 737 fleet. And I'm just going to give you a very, very high level of what our focus is, but you know, when you hear me describe the steps, the standardized steps that we are using in upset recovery, you'll see CRM-10 all over it. And I think that is a positive evolution from where we were back many years ago. So again, coming back to the varying backgrounds, we're now starting to see pilots, the pilots that are going to be joining United. We are still hiring experienced pilots, But we realized that very soon we were going to be seeing less experienced pilots, pilots that may not even have any experience in flying upside down. And then we have to have a program that allows us to get a relatively junior, inexperienced pilot being able to perform at a high level in a very, very short period of time with an experienced pilot, or maybe a pilot from the military with lots of experience. So, the program that we're rolling out and will be rolling out here in the next couple of months basically takes a look at how do we get the shared mental model that we are in an upset and get us, kick-started into recovery of this undesired aircraft state. And so I'll just give you what the steps are, and I mean there's a lot underneath that, and if you want to talk offset here, I'm happy to share a little bit more with you, this is very high level. The first is that when either pilot detects an aircraft in an undesired aircraft state, you announce upset. The pilot flying disconnects autopilot, autothrust, then announces and performs push, followed by announces and performs roll, announces and performs thrust, and stabilizes the aircraft. That's the model we start with. Now, I must emphasize, there is a lot of technical dialogue and there's a lot of technical pieces to that training when we get into the simulator. But it's that CRM approach that puts us into that mindset. I think we're all, or many are familiar with the tragic crash of AirAsia 8501 back in December 2014. This is an Airbus over the Java Sea, deep stalled, crashed, 155 fatalities. If you look at the accident report in that, there were, like most accidents, there was a long list of issues and deviations of SOPs. The captain was trying to instruct the first officer, or he commanded to the first officer, pull down. Well, to a pilot, pull down is not intuitive. That first command and direction, in this case, was counter to regaining control of the aircraft. And there's a lot of other things. There's, fly-by-wire issues, sticks canceling each other out. So United felt, we're not going to get into the details of specific commands. For years, United used the word attitude to illustrate or get the other pilot thinking that we're in an undesired aircraft state. Well, you think about it, and this comes to startle. Your brain doesn't think real well when it's startled. I found there is a big difference between a 3-syllable word like attitude and a 2-syllable word like upset. And after lots of debate, United chose upset as being the triggering call to say, we need to get this aircraft out of an undesired aircraft state. So, I think that's a good, evolution for United. And I see a lot of similarities with what we have done with CRM-TEM and applying that to SMS. SMS came around and Canada was into SMS even earlier than the US was. Again, SMS was introduced, safety management system was introduced as a cultural change. But as we move into SMS, we're going to see many of the same principles applied, specific policies and procedures that we will do to uphold the SMS. And much like what you're doing at Delta, you'll do that in a very similar turn to SMS. So, and I mean, there's a lot to describe. I believe ultimately where we want to go as an industry, I'm not just speaking on behalf of United in this, where we want to go, and it kind of goes to Dave's point, is we need to move CRM-TEM to be transparent. We have to stop saying, okay, good job on the technical stuff, now let's put the CRM, let's put a little bit of CRM in there. We've got to do business every day just putting those processes in. And, you know, maybe I'll be wrong here, and, you know, after I'm gone in the industry, maybe we won't be calling it CRM-TEM. Maybe we'll be calling it human factors. And I think we have to take that kind of approach. I do applaud the association, Dave, by the way, for, and Captain Canola alluded to it this morning, of saying in the safety efforts of the association, we have to take a human factors approach, whether it be in pilot training, whether it have to be aircraft design, you know, and all the facets of the association's goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for a very great discussion of what United's been doing and how they put that into their, taking our human factors capabilities and put it into the upset prevention and recovery training, and which actually takes effect next year in March. 2019 is, if you haven't been doing the training, it has to start next March. And also a good discussion from both Delta and United of how they've taken what Barbara talked about, and instead of training technical skills and the soft skills as separate items, is we actually need to merge and be training them together. And the easiest way to look at that is a takeoff. We can all do takeoffs. We do the mechanical part of that in the motor skills. But how many different human considerations and how many CRM stuff, you know, are we doing before we take off? I used to teach every takeoff's optional. The landings are mandatory, but the takeoffs are optional. Because when you roll on that runway, there's a lot of things going through your mind as a captain and as a first officer. So that's what it is. And so when we train takeoffs, we shouldn't be training takeoffs and then have a separate class over here to talk about CRM and say, oh, by the way, take these principles of planning, leadership, communications, and apply it to all these situations. We should be training, when we're training takeoffs, exactly what decisions are we making, what planning, all that. All that CRM stuff should be transparent and included within the maneuvers. So maybe the technical and non-technical actually disappear, and we're training them together so the pilots are thinking, you know, about that at the time. So,
Dave, I wanted to bring up a point in the previous panel to ours. I was totally fascinated with. You know, I illustrated CRM-TEM as far as upsets go, but I think an equally interesting science now is the digital age that we find ourselves in with the EFBs. And again, it's yet another example of technology getting ahead of our mental capability to process it all. And boy, you know, that's something that we are struggling with at United looking at, because the business case of pushing information, Brian alluded to it in his comments, you don't touch the revisions anymore. You don't, you know, and somebody, an employee will come up to you and say, well, you know, the company policy changed on that. Oh, when did that happen? Oh, well, they pushed it to the iPad. Didn't you read it? Well, I go home typically to 60 emails in my inbox, of which, you know, 55 of them are total junk. But we are overloaded, and I think, you know, something that is fertile for looking at the human factors approach is information retrieval in a timely fashion, information retrieval in an environment that's not as comfortable as sitting at a desk or a table, but a very, very dynamic one. And I think that speaks to your point of we ought to be doing that with our EFB introduction, because like Delta and like probably most of the airlines out there right now, we're going paperless in a very, very rapid way. We're going so fast that, again, to go back to understanding what our philosophy is on using the information, I think that's something that we really need to look at. Thank you.
So I have a question before we go to the audience. I have a question for each of you just to think about. And so we have performance standards for the technical skills. And we're all very familiar with those. A lot of the ways that we've been evaluating, I guess, CRM, which is changing, has been subjective. And so I just want each of you to kind of just a couple questions is, do you think we should be, evaluated with grades or not? The CRM stuff in the future or is it embedded within the maneuvers themselves? But the second thing is, should we have an industry set of skills performance for these CRM elements? Similar to these airman certification standards that we have for the maneuvers, should we have that a reference that everybody's using the same? Should we all develop our own? Or, if you think that we should be grading or not grading. So I'll start with you, Barbara, even though you're not with an airline, I know that you have some thoughts about this.
Well, like I said before, I think the first step is that we need to define very clearly what the specific knowledge and skills are that we are expecting the pilot to be able to do. And that goes we do that pretty well for the technical side, but we haven't done that very well on the non-technical side. We have observable behaviors, but those may or may not actually be what the pilot is doing or needs to do. And breaking down those skills and those knowledge elements so that we can actually train them. I do agree that we need to move towards a more integrated methodology where we're looking at the activity that the pilot's performing, like a takeoff, and looking at the technical component of it, as well as all the other factors that need to be incorporated in that to do it to the performance that we consider to be acceptable for a professional pilot. I do think that it's important to grade those. And in order to grade those, we need to be able to teach them in a way that's very clear so that the pilots know what is expected. And we have a lot of knowledge on human performance and what is needed to communicate effectively, to work effectively as a team. And we need to leverage what the academic literature has provided, as well as industry, and put that human performance knowledge into application in training.
Thank you. Rob?
I agree entirely with what Barbara just said. I think it needs to be graded. And so where we are a little bit ahead of the game is that we have defined now these observable behaviors. So under AQP, we took those observable behaviors and they have become the qual standard. So now, like I said earlier, they become enforceable. It's still a work in progress, I would think, because again, how do you grade? Remember we said, how do you teach air? Well, how do you grade air? But we're working that. And like I said, we have now made these the qual standards to say, yeah, this is what we expect to see you do. It's tough in grading because some of the previous grade systems don't necessarily fit, meaning you can't be 50% of a standard like you would in a technical maneuver. So we're working on looking at a new grade scale over at Delta, and that's a work in progress as well as we move forward at this. But we were kind of under the mindset of tell the pilots, train the pilots, check the pilots. So we told them, we put out some flight path management videos and said the world is changing, things are coming. Now we're in the middle of training them. We put our books out, said it's a mandatory read, learn what these things are. You come back for training, CQ and IQ. Now we're showing them how to use these skills. We're training them on that. And when they come back around next time, then we'll say, yep, now you're accountable to do that. We don't want to see two heads go down at the same time. I can clearly evaluate that. It also lends itself to a more standard grade scale, which is really the key to actually listing these observable behaviors so everybody's working from the same pages. Now, whether it goes to an industry-wide, it's above my pay grade, I don't know. But it would work.
But you're also using video clips also, right, to train?
Well, we produce training videos. We're not, currently we're not taking video of the crew. If that's
Right. No, but you're using training videos.
Yes.
To train the maneuvers and because then they get to watch the appropriate behavior.
Yeah, we have what they call e-brief, where we have, but that's really more of the ones we have out now are a technical, they're technical maneuvers. The flight path management videos that came out are more of where we're moving in flight path management and CRM.
Okay. Great. Okay, thank you. Chuck?
So United is basically following the same thing. We've established qualification standards, and we have done a similar approach. I kind of characterize it as the first generation, though, of evaluation of CRM. And, you know, in my view, to Rob's point and Barbara's point as well, is you have the challenge that you got to make sure the student understands what the expectations are. And then you have to develop qualification standards that are truly measurable. Then you have to decide whether you're going to point a binary scale, you know, yes, you passed that, or no, you didn't pass that, or did not possess that, or whether you want to apply a sensitive scale to that. And that opens up the IE obligation to make sure they are all on board with what they are seeing, and that there's not variance between evaluators on that. You know, the FAA has been pushing for grading CRM for the last 20 years. Matter of fact, if you pull out a tattered brown copy of the ATP practical test standards back in the early 1990s, they say the examiner needs to evaluate CRM. And a lot of people said, wow, I wonder what that looks like. You know, are you going to just say, well, I think you have good judgment. I think you have good decision making. What are you going to do? How are you going to pass? You know, what are you going to do that? Well, you're going to fly the airplane and demonstrate commandability of the aircraft. But to grade CRM on a grade scale, I thought that's something. And then you'd read deeper into that, and CRM was in fact calling for a checklist, announcing automation changes. Well, that's technical. I believe the next generation of CRM is going to be technical CRM, in that we will get down, and much like the work that Delta's doing, and certainly that we are looking into United, we will be able to drill down, and the next generation will be measurable. But again, I think that will kind of shade or smear the boundary between CRM and technical. We won't have this concrete wall. Is it CRM? Is it technical?
Okay, thank you. So take questions from the audience and take the first one.
Hi, thank you. Ben Berman, United Line pilot. Just want to ask Captain Piroumian if you would please give, if you can, 2 or 3 specific, illustrative examples of your observables, just so I would understand what you're looking at and measuring. It'd be great. Thanks.
Super easy question. You hit me a big one, easy one. Because I have my faves that I like. So under planning is a great example. We have a CRM skill, and I kind of paraphrase, but it's pretty close to verbatim, that says all pilots will adapt to changes and brief a plan. So we want to brief a plan. My next favorite planning skill is we should brief the level of automation we're going to use. My third favorite skill under planning is we should basically fly the brief, right? So if you look at and watch some of these, in some of our scenarios, that's exactly what we've done in our LOS training, is to say, in the instructor guide, it says, pay particular attention to what he says here at the gate, because down the road, we're going to present this scenario. We want to see if he did what he said he's going to do down here, because if not, we've got precursor to a deviation. And so that's planning. Monitoring, a couple of easy ones, right? Monitoring is a softball. All captains will ensure somebody's monitoring the flight path at all times, right? You should alert the other crew member when monitoring is inhibited, is what's in the book, and we put in the parentheses, i.e., you're going heads down. The other pilot should catch you up when you come back. You should tell the other pilot, I'm back. So even simple, right? You make a PA, you put the headset down. Typically, we will say, oh, no changes, or go out to the lab and you come back and say, well, what happened while I was gone, right? We want to catch. These are very easy, observable skills, but just a few of these things, but we can get our pilots to always follow those skills. And I don't mean our pilots, I mean all pilots. I think we're going to reduce our deviations by a lot. Sure.
Hey, guys. Hey, good talk. I wanted to touch in or drill in on something that Captain Hogeman, and good to see you, Chuck, had to say about fleet harmonization. And Alaska Airlines is previously has been a real monoculture airline, and we're fortunate enough to come together, and now we've got Airbus that we're bringing into the fleet. And I think, as a matter of fact, my counterparts are standing right behind me. They'd agree that the Boeing is certainly the superior aircraft. But what I'm really wanting to ask you all is, you all have a lot more experience harmonizing and trying to find that balance point, at least as far as CRM go. Let's maybe just keep it at that point, on how do you have continuity and yet still can retain the specialness of each piece of equipment that you have?
I can go first.
I'll speak to that in about 15 seconds, which is simple because we have 9 fleets now at Delta Airlines, and CRM transcends all fleets, period. Not to be smart, but that's it. It's the same skills essentially across all our airplanes.
So, you know, harmonization's always been a big deal, and, you know, particularly we're forecasting quite a few seat changes in the next couple of years. And the idea is to not say, okay, well, now I'm going to work for the 777 airline because I just came off the 756 airline. So we work, and, you know, my colleague Rob and I are making sure that human factors, professional development, where our CRM resources reside, is thought of as a fleet. They sit down at the table with all the fleets when we try to look at SOP changes. United spends a lot of time trying to harmonize as best we can, because, like you, Brian, there are some United pilots say, well, we have 4 fleets, and then there's the Airbus, you know, and there are some challenges, you know, there are some challenges with that. But we spend a lot of time sitting down and looking at what the training, how the training is viewed by somebody that's been 15 years on the Airbus, now is going to the 756, totally different philosophy. And so I think what we do from certainly just an administrative standpoint is make sure that as we have these discussions, we've got the CRM, our CRM experts and our subject matter experts in there. And the people that Rob has in his department, basically, while they may fly one single airplane, they all have the same unified approach towards United's philosophy for using and applying the skills that we give our pilots.
Very much.
Thank you, Chuck. So I'd like to take this time, I guess, to thank each of the panelists for coming. It was an excellent discussion, for giving us information on how, you know, what you're doing now and how we need to expand it. And I hope it gives us some food for thought, because today in all the different panels, and even the next one coming up, is that there's a lot of CRM issues that are coming. One of them that we heard in the information management before us is the use of this information management, which has a large effect on how we do crew resource management. So I will put one more plug in to please, all the pilots in the room to please go do that survey on the EFB. But more importantly, get the message out to all the pilots at your airlines so we can give the FAA a lot of information and us a lot of information on what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, because I speak a lot about EFBs and how we use those EFBs to do our job, to have situational awareness, a shared mental model, and how we communicate. And using all that, that is all part of what we do to do our jobs. And the only way that the FAA is going to get the information we need is for us to hit the ground, get the grassroots, and get our pilots to fill out the thing. So I'll put a thing in there. But thank you again for your time. We'll be available during the break and the rest of the day if you have any questions. Thank you.